Hi folks, thanks for joining us. It's Al from the Psych Collective. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I see hundreds of people a year, and I tend to treat people with as little medication as I can, so I've had to develop some tricks to do that. One of the things though that is, I think, really kind of helpful for people to understand with medications is how they really work, what they're actually doing. There's a lot of talk with antidepressants about the increasing serotonin to correct a chemical imbalance. So that's probably nonsense. We don't really have any evidence that people have any kind of chemical imbalance. It's a very convenient line that the drug companies teach doctors to use, and I think the doctors believe it, but it's just not a very sophisticated way to think about it. The medications like the antidepressants certainly do um, increase the availability of serotonin in the brain, but that's not because it's not helpful because there's a shortage of serotonin there, or not usually anyway. It's mostly there's an effect of having extra serotonin that is sometimes helpful. Now, the thing about antidepressants is they're used in states of high sensitivity, they're used in states of anxiety, they're used in depression, they're used in all kinds of different things that aren't depression. So the very term antidepressant is somewhat misleading, I think. What these medications mostly do, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, what they mostly actually do is they make people feel a little bit more indifferent to things. So you might think, well, how is that helpful? How does that make people happy? Um, well, it doesn't make people happy straight away. Okay, what happens is when you're more indifferent to stuff, things don't get under your skin so badly. Okay, and what that translates to, for example, is you might be less irritable. Okay, what does that mean? Well, if you're less irritable, you might find that your relationships are a bit more harmonious. Okay, what does that mean? It means your relationships are probably better. What does that mean? It means you might be feeling happier in your relationship and not feeling so invalidated or whatever you might be feeling that made you feel depressed in the first place. So, by reducing people's sensitivity, it can be a really helpful thing for relationships. Okay, and I think that's one of the main ways that it sort of manifests an improvement. And that's why it reduces anxiety too, right? Because you become a bit more indifferent to the things that make you anxious. Now you're still capable of, caring about things, and you're still capable of becoming anxious about things with serotonergic antidepressants. But generally, you're a bit more indifferent. People often talk about feeling a little bit less invested in the decisions that they make, and feeling that things don't matter quite so much as they did before. Now, if you've got a particularly sensitive temperament, that might be extremely helpful. So that's really kind of the nub of how the serotonergic antidepressants work in my view. By improving people's sensitivity, they make people less vulnerable to the vicissitudes of life, and life feels better, and you can enjoy stuff more. So that's, I think, the main way they work. Yeah, there might be other things that they do. I mean, they're even thinking there might be an anti-inflammatory role, which is interesting. But I don't think they're normalising some deficit of serotonin that people have. I think they're increasing the levels of serotonin to make people feel a bit more indifferent, and life doesn't feel so bad then, and you then can feel happy. It's worth noting there's another class of medications that are pretty commonly prescribed called the SNRIs. So they work on serotonin as well as noradrenaline. Now, I think they're really helpful if you've got the kind of depression where you can't get out of bed because you're so, what we call psychomotor slowed down. They're pretty good actually, because that sort of noradrenaline sounds a bit like adrenaline. It's kind of the brain's version of adrenaline. They kind of get people up and moving, so that can be really helpful. But if you don't have that kind of depression, in fact, if you've got the kind of depression where you're a bit sort of agitated anyway, it can make that worse. Certainly, if the doses get jacked up to high doses, which commonly happens because it doesn't seem to be working all that well, Doc, up goes the dose, you can really be quite affected by the noradrenaline. So when you lose your temper, it can be much more impressive. It can certainly increase anxiety symptoms, no question about that. I'd say I just exercise caution with SNRI medications because of that noradrenergic effect. The SSRI medications, which we discussed earlier, like I said, they can work pretty well, but don't be mistaken that they're going to be happy pills per se. They're more make you a bit more indifferent pills. and then maybe you have an opportunity to feel different. Now, it's worth noting the common side effects of these medications is people talk about feeling very numb. Well, numbness is basically just a sort of more exaggerated form of indifference, right? So the numbness just means they're working, all right? Now, it might be that the dose is too high, okay? Sometimes people talk about feeling like a zombie. Well, that's when the dose is really high, right? Okay, you're really numb. And that's quite an unpleasant feeling for people. Um, can be worth if the dose is getting put up a bit and you're feeling numb, talking to your doc about, gradually moving it down. You absolutely don't want to drop the dose of these things too quickly. You're really asking for problems if you do that, especially if you've been on them for a while. What else can I say about those? Look, the SSRIs and the SNRIs, they're the most commonly prescribed antidepressants. There are some other kind of weird and wonderful things that work in slightly different ways, and we won't get into that today. But my take on it is, if you realise that their job is to make you feel a bit less sensitive and that makes life go a bit more smoother, then they're probably working as well as you could expect. If you're taking them and think that you're going to be over the moon with joy, that ain't going to happen, guys. So anyways, I hope that's helpful. And we'll look at doing some other clips if this is of any interest. In the meantime, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, check us out on Facebook and Instagram and so forth. And see you next time.